Hello, this video will explore Pettit et al.'s 2020 research on the relationships between biparental care, mate choice, and mating calls in golden rocket frogs. In nature, raising young and finding mates is of the utmost importance, as producing offspring is the primary way that an individual's genes are carried on to the next generation. As such, evolution favors the development of parental care systems that benefit the survivorship of the young and the development of traits that are desirable to the opposite sex. This study primarily operates under the framework of sexual selection and aims to explain how mate selection is affected by honest signals of mate quality and how the mating signals themselves can act as indicators of mate quality. More specifically, the researchers aim to investigate how the quality of paternal care affects the survival of golden rocket frog offspring and what the relationship is between male frog calls and their quality of paternal care, as well as what acoustic properties attract the females to the males. The model species used in this study is Anomaloglossus bb, or the golden rocket frog. It is native to Guyana in South America. Golden rocket frogs serve as a good model system for sexual selection analysis because their patterns of mating calls are easy to observe and analyze, and because they exhibit biparental care. Males protect the eggs from desiccation, attend to the tadpoles, and more. Females primarily lay the eggs and feed the tadpoles with unfertilized eggs. This well-documented understanding of their baseline behavior, as well as their similarity to other biparental frogs, make them a good model system for exploring paternal care, sexual selection, and acoustic signaling. The researchers first aimed to evaluate if the presence of paternal care affects the survivorship of the offspring. They hypothesized that the presence of paternal care increases the likelihood that offspring will survive to the point of hatching, as that would provide sufficient benefits to outweigh the energetic costs of raising young. The researchers ran this manipulation experiment by finding actively mating partners in the wild and then tagging both the adults and their eggs. Interestingly, unlike many species that exhibit biparental care, golden rocket frogs are not monogamous. They are actually polygynous. So, in order to ensure that all clutches were independent, the experimenters only studied each male's first clutch of eggs. From there, the clutches would be randomly assigned into either the experimental group, from which the fathers would be removed and not allowed to help their young, or the control group, in which the father was allowed to raise the young. The researchers then observed the eggs until they either hatched or perished, taking note of the fate of each egg and each clutch. This experiment found a statistically significant difference between the proportions of eggs that successfully hatched between the two groups. As shown in the double bar graph, which has the qualitative fate of each egg on the x-axis and the proportion of eggs that experienced each fate on the y-axis, the eggs that had a present father were about 4 times as likely to successfully hatch when compared to their fatherless fellows. This strongly suggests that paternal presence is extremely favorable to the survivorship of the offspring. The second experiment involves evaluating the relationships between male calls and paternal care. For this experiment, the studiers evaluated 8 different qualities of golden rocket frog calls and hypothesized that one of those 8 properties has a correlation with degree and/or quality of paternal care, which would make the calls an honest indicator of paternal quality. In order to evaluate the call qualities, the experimenters recorded the calls of wild males, analyzed the waveforms, and recorded 8 figures for each one. Each call consists of several short pulsing noises. They analyzed all the calls for dominant frequency, pulse duration, pulse interval, pulse rate, call duration, call interval, and pulses per call. In order to evaluate the degree of paternal care, the experimenters observed the same group of wild males using video recordings and added together the amount of time each male spent attending to his eggs and the amount of time the male spent defending the territory. After running statistical analyses on all 8 call properties, the experimenters found that there was a strong positive correlation between the length of a male's call and the quality of his paternal care as quantified by their methods. This evidence indicates that the length of a male's call is an honest indicator of paternal quality. The third and final experiment involves evaluating the relationships between male calls and female preference. For this experiment, the experimenters predicted that females would prefer males with longer calls over those with shorter calls based on the results of the previous experiment. For this experiment, the experimenters used a sound synthesis program to generate calls of 4 different lengths. In turn, they put different females into the center of a circular testing enclosure with a 1-meter diameter, allowed them to acclimate, and then played 2 calls of different durations on opposite sides of the enclosure. They marked a female as choosing one of the calls if she moved within 10 centimeters of one of the speakers. This experiment found that females tended to show a preference for longer calls when presented with calls of 2 different durations. This is shown by this complicated-looking graph, which has call duration measured in number of pulses per call on the x-axis and the proportion of females in each experiment on the y-axis. Though the lines may seem confusing, each pair of points linked by a line just shows the data from an individual pairing. For example, the points circled in purple show the proportional results for the pairing between the 4-pulse call and the 5-pulse call. Putting this all together, given the fact that paternal care is important for offspring survivorship, female golden rocket frogs prefer males with longer calls because males with longer calls give better paternal care, thus implying that longer male calls imply better survivorship for the male's offspring. This makes the length of a male's call an honest signal of the male's offspring's survivorship. These results seem credible due to the meticulous methodology of the experimenters. They accounted for all possible confounding variables in their statistical analysis and discussion, including temperature, side bias, qualities of call other than duration, and more. The experimental design seems very good in that the experimenters controlled for all other variables such that any differences in survivorship and female preference could only be attributed to male presence or call duration respectively. The experimenters also did a good job answering their initial experimental question regarding the complex relationship between male call, paternal care, and survivorship. The results are also credible due to the fact that they make sense in terms of evolutionary theory. This behavior is a good example of intersexual selection, in which one sex's traits are meant to attract the other. In this case, the association between offspring survivorship and male call duration makes longer male calls attractive to females. This paper introduces a term that they call the good parent hypothesis, which they define to be the theory in which males are selected to honestly show their own quality of parental care. This almost seems to be an intermediate between the male in good condition and good genes theories, as the traits are honest indicators that the male is in good condition and can provide for its offspring. The female hunt for high-quality mates also lines up with Bateman's principle, which argues that male reproductive success is optimized by having many mates, while female reproductive success is optimized by having the highest quality mates. In golden rocket frogs, the males mate with several females, while the females assess calls in order to find the highest quality mates. This research connects well to other research in the field. One of the more obvious connections is to Hosler's 1989 paper that introduces the concept of the good parent hypothesis and validates it through a genetic model. Sinar et al.'s 2002 research on great tits aims to address if the good parent theory justifies great tit behavior similarly to the way that Pettit et al. Aimed to justify the golden rocket frog behavior. Dugas et al.'s 2015 study on poison frogs is a fascinating analysis of the cost of biparental care in frogs, and it further expands upon Bateman's principle in that the cost of mating with lower quality mates can be extremely high for female frogs. In the future, further research can be done in order to determine the specific mechanisms behind the association between male calls and paternal care quality.